Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Belmont Manor and Historic Park. My name is Nick Munihan, and I have the pleasure of serving as Howard County Director of Recreation and Parks. On behalf of Howard County Recreation and Parks, thank you for joining us for this special commemoration of the Belmont Report at Belmont, co-hosted by HOCO 250, Health and Human Services, and Office for Human Research Protections. It is a pleasure to host you at one of Howard County's most treasured historic sites. As the stewards of Belmont Manor and Historic Park, we are honored to preserve not only this remarkable building and landscape, but also the extraordinary stories that unfolded here. Today's program is part of Howard County's HOCO 250 initiative commemorating America's 250th anniversary. By uncovering and sharing the people, places, and events that shaped our nation's history, while many know Belmont as a beautiful historic estate, far fewer realize this site played a pivotal role in the development of modern research ethics. It is a story that deserves to be told and remembered. Historic preservation is about much more than maintaining buildings. It is about preserving the ideas, conversations, and moments that influenced our communities and our country. By sharing these stories, we create opportunities to learn from the past, celebrate progress, and inspire future generations. Before we continue, I'd like to recognize someone whose vision and dedication helped bring today's program to life. Kimberly Prime has served in a dual role throughout this effort. As chair of the HOCO 250 committee, she spearheaded the planning and coordination of this commemorative event, bringing together local and federal partners to this remarkable story. At the same time, she's also the superintendent here at Belmont Manor and Historic Park within Howard County Recreation and Parks. She works each and every day to preserve this historic property and to ensure it continues to serve as a place where history is shared with the public. Kimberly, just my heartfelt thank you for all your efforts. We are also especially grateful to our partners at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Office for Human Research Protections, whose collaboration has made today's program possible. Together, we are ensuring that this remarkable chapter of Howard County's history receives the national recognition it deserves. Please give them a round of applause too, please. As we commemorate America's 250th anniversary through HOCO 250, today's program reminds us that history is not only found in the battles we fought or the documents we signed, it is also found in the ideas that changed how we care for one another. Belmont is one of those places where history continues to shape the future. It is now my distinct honor to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Stephanie Haridopolos serves as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health Policy and Director of National Health Communications at the Office of the Surgeon General at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. A board-certified family medicine physician, Dr. Haridopolos has dedicated her career to advancing public health through clinical care, health policy, and national leadership. Her commitment to ethical, evidence-based public health makes her especially fitting to help us commemorate the enduring legacy of the Belmont Report. Please join me in giving a warm Howard County welcome to Dr. Stephanie Haridopolos.
Well, good morning, everyone. What a beautiful setting for us to be at this lovely day. July 12th. We have a fun day for you. As Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Health, that is Office of the Assistant Secretary of Health. So it was just an honor to work with one of our program offices, Human Research Protection, to collaborate with Howard County. And when they say HOCO, I thought, is this homecoming? No. But it kind of is a homecoming, really, for the Belmont Report. So I wanted to get into how I feel. I will tell you that I first learned about the Belmont Report as a medical student. I'm not going to tell you how long ago, because it might have been a while. But I was a family medicine physician for 23 years. So I took 12 years to go through school, so you could do the math. But it intrigued me that before the 70s, we didn't have something like this as guiding principles. And it really gives me goosebumps to stand before you at the very place, February 1976, where 11 commissioners came together. Theologians, physicians, ethicists, lawyers, and scientists, and civic leaders all embarked on a 4-day journey retreat and forged the early ideas for what would later become as the world-renowned Belmont Report. And at that time, 1976, I was thinking that was a bicentennial. And here we are celebrating the semi-quincentennial. In 76, I was 4. I had open heart surgery for atrial septal defect. I started life as a patient, and at that point started my North Star in wanting to help others and having the empathy of knowing what it's like to become a patient, which is so important to me, why this report being here really meant something to me today. This is hollow ground. Who ought to receive the benefits of research and bear its burdens? Those words come directly from the Belmont Report and illustrate the many moral issues and challenges the National Commission considered when identifying the report's 3 basic principles: respect, integrity, justice, and beneficence. There's integrity in there too. That continue to guide protections for human research in the US and worldwide. And you will hear more about these guiding principles during today's panel discussion. And the applications that came from the report: informed consent, and the benefits and risks in selecting the patients. The National Research Act of '74 was signed on this very day by President Nixon 52 years ago. My husband is here today. He's a congressman, Representative Mike Haridopolos, who is also a U.S. history professor. So this was important for him to be a part of this celebration with you. The unethical U.S. public service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro Male of Tuskegee and Macon County, Alabama, 1932 and 1972. Miss Lillie Tyson, who represents the Voices for Our Father's Legacy Foundation. On behalf of the U.S. Public Health Service, we deeply regret leading this unethical study for 4 decades and betraying the trust of 625 Black men and their families who endured its profound injustices that were egregious, violations that were unethical, and denial of care. We cannot undo the shame in that chapter of our history, but we can remember it, acknowledge it, and learn from it, and work together to build a better present and future in large part, and that's why we gather here today. So it was charged in this setting in the 1970s that the commission met monthly for almost 4 years. Most deliberations open to the public to create the new ethical framework to ensure that studies like the USPHS untreated syphilis study would never happen again. And the commission ultimately produced 12 reports, the Belmont being the most famous of all of them, and it was cited and revered ever since then. Today, I'm proud to serve as a steward of the Belmont principles and the federal regulations informed by them that are overseen by our team at the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Health, the Office of Human Research Protection, where we have Captain David Wong and Dr. Natalie Klein here today. We also have the head of Office of Research Integrity, Sheila Garrity, in presence. So I wanted to give them shouts out. Today, I'm proud to serve and that steward, but also HHS continues to maintain a steadfast commitment to conducting ethical research and protecting human research participants with a focus of advancing gold standard science and providing meaningful informed consent. Today, the Belmont principles are applied to research across a wide variety of fields, from cancer to substance abuse to mental health, digital technologies, and AI. The principles underscore our engagement in communities and challenge us to continue to put patients and families first. With that, it is such a pleasure now to get to introduce one of the most brilliant men I've ever met in my life, outside of my husband, Dr. J. Bhattacharya. Not only is the most brilliant, but probably the kindest person you'll ever meet. We'll give you so much time when you want to talk to him. He's my friend and colleague, Dr. J, who is the director of the National Institute of Health and also performing the delegable duties of the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Please join me in welcoming Dr. J. Bhattacharya to the podium.
Hi, everybody. Well, thank you for the chance to talk. It's a privilege to reflect the enduring importance of the Belmont Report. It's one of the defining documents in the history of American biomedical research, and one that continues to shape the work of the National Institutes of Health. The Belmont Report reminds us of a simple but profound truth. Scientific excellence and ethical excellence are inseparable. The discoveries that improve health and save lives are possible only because people are willing to place their trust in the research enterprise. That trust is our most precious asset, and we have a responsibility to earn it. The report's three guiding principles, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, remain as relevant today as they were when they were first articulated. Respect for persons affirms the dignity and autonomy of every person, everyone who volunteers to participate in research, heroes all of them. It reminds us that informed consent is more than just a signature on a page. It's a commitment to honesty, transparency, and partnership with the research subjects. Beneficence challenges us to pursue discovery with both ambition and humility, to maximize the potential benefits of research while minimizing its risks. At the NIH, this principle informs everything we do, from study design and peer review to oversight and participant protections. Our pursuit of innovation must always be matched by our commitment to conducting research that improves the well-being of research subjects. Finally, justice calls on us to ensure that the opportunities and benefits of research are shared broadly. Biomedical research is strongest when it advances, improve the health of all people. Relatedly, we must never take advantage of the vulnerable in pursuit of scientific knowledge. The COVID-19 pandemic underscored the enduring wisdom of the Belmont Report. During a public health emergency, the pressure to move quickly is immense, and rightly so. Yet, the pandemic reminded us that urgency cannot come at the expense of ethics. Public trust in science depends not only on the speed of discovery, but also on the confidence that research is conducted with integrity, transparency, and respect for every participant. The lessons of COVID-19 reinforce that the Belmont principles are not obstacles to scientific progress, but are the very conditions that make lasting progress possible. COVID-19 also taught us another important lesson. Science advances through rigorous evidence, open inquiry, and a willingness to question our assumptions in light of new data. At times of uncertainty, reasonable scientists may disagree. That process of respectful debate is not weakness in science. It's one of its greatest strengths. The Belmont Report reminds us that that respect extends beyond our interactions with research subjects. It also shapes the culture of science itself. Respect for persons calls on us to listen carefully to those we serve. Beneficence calls on us to remain focused on improving health through the best available evidence. And justice calls on us to ensure that all people, all communities, have both a voice in research and an opportunity to benefit from its discoveries. By fostering transparency, intellectual humility, and open scientific dialogue, we strengthen both our science and the public trust upon which it depends. The scientific landscape has changed so much since the Belmont Report. Today, we're exploring the frontiers of genomics, artificial intelligence, advanced therapeutics and data science. There are advances such as the cure for sickle cell anemia that look to me like science fiction. Those advances have come because of respect for persons in the conduct of research. And the obligation that we have is to make sure that those advances are available to as broad a set of people as possible. The Belmont Report doesn't provide every answer, but it gives us the framework to ask the right questions and to meet new challenges with integrity. The NIH has long been entrusted with advancing science that improves health and extends life. That mission depends not only on scientific ingenuity, but also on the confidence of the American people. The Belmont Report reminds us that public trust is earned through respect, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to ethical conduct. As we look forward to the future, the NIH's commitment to the principles of the Belmont Report remains steadfast. They're not simply a part of our history, which was mixed in some ways, but they're essential to our future. They ensure us that as science advances, our values advance with it, and that every discovery reflects our deepest commitment to the people we are privileged to serve. We must not lose our souls as we advance our scientific knowledge. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. It's my great privilege to introduce to you our keynote speaker today, Ms. Lillie Tyson Head, the founding president of Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation. Ms. Head, if you could join me here at the podium.
Good morning. And happy 250th anniversary celebration of these United States. Thank all of you for your presence here on this Sunday morning, on these hallowed grounds that is just as significant today as they were in 1979. It is a distinguished privilege for me to be here today representing Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation as president. I would like to thank Howard County 250 Belmont Report at Belmont Committee, and especially Kimberly Prime for their gracious invitation. To map a dark disease, science bartered human lives and allowed healing hands to withdraw from those in need. Today, this history stands as a warning that medical progress is a hollow gain unless it protects human rights and honors community trust. These words remind us of the United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro Male at Tuskegee and Macon County, Alabama from 1932 to 1972. The ultimate betrayal that forced our nation to re-examine its medical conscience and ultimately draft the Belmont Report. To understand why the Belmont Report came about and why it was necessary, we have to look back at how we got here. For 40 years, from 1932 to 72, the U.S. Public Health Service conducted what is officially now called the United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro Male at Tuskegee and Macon County, Alabama, rather than Tuskegee Syphilis Study, a title that was erroneous and misleading. Let us be perfectly clear and honest about the facts. This was not a clinical study gone wrong. It was a deliberate, state-sponsored deception. 625 African American men in rural Macon County, Alabama. My father, Freddie Lee Tyson, and great uncle Rufus Neal, and cousins Reuben Neal and Ed Chisholm were among the men recruited under the semblance of receiving free health treatment for an ailment called bad blood. Bad blood was a phrase used to describe various physical ailments. These men were lied to, deceived, and denied. They were given placebo, line tested with painful spinal taps, told to be cures, and actively blocked from receiving treatment of penicillin, even after 1947, when penicillin became the definitive, easily accessible cure for syphilis. Researchers and doctors intentionally withheld it. They did this so they could track the disease until the men died and their bodies could be autopsied. When Peter Buxton, the whistleblower, told the story to Jean Heller, an investigative reporter at Associated Press, this atrocity was revealed and ended in 1972. The American public grasped. But for the African American communities, it solidified terrifying truth that medical establishment could view your body as a means to an end rather than a human being worthy of life, dignity, and care. When the truth came to light in July of 1972, by way of local newspapers, television news, and later African American magazines, the men and their families learned and were shocked, learning that they were and their loved ones had been unwitting participants in this egregious study was absolutely devastating. The trauma was immediate and overwhelming. We felt shame that was never ours to carry. Our emotions swung from disbelief to fury as we learned what had been done to these much-loved men, our fathers, our grandfathers, our uncles, cousins, neighbors, church members, and pillars of our community. To understand where we are today and why we are here, we must first remember how we arrived here. For 40 years, from 1932 to to 72, the U.S. Public Service was conducting a study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. All of these men came from rural Alabama. At the time, they were poor farmers, sharecroppers, less educated, lacked proper health care, and lived in an economically impoverished area. When promised that they had an opportunity to receive medical care for their ailment, bad blood, these men believed and they trusted. They unknowingly became subjects without consent, without treatment, and without dignity. They were observed, not cared for. They were deceived, not informed, and they were exploited and not respected. This was not research. It was exploitation rooted in racist and pseudoscientific beliefs that claimed African Americans were subhuman, felt less pain, and lacked the capacity for ethical reasoning. This was a devastating lie used to justify decades of medical cruelty under the guise of scientific progress. The political fallout from the exposure for the study was swift. Congress stepped in, passing the National Research Act in 1974, which led to this historic gathering at Belmont Conference Center. In 1979, out of that retreat came a foundational text that completely rewrote the laws of modern medicine, the Belmont Report. The Belmont Report was written as a direct rebuke to the honors of the U.S. Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis. And it coded 3 absolute, non-negotiable principles that must govern human research forever. These principles you have heard will be and is the longest lasting set of principles that was devised to address the longest non-therapeutic biomedical study in U.S. medical history. Respect for persons, number 1. Respect for persons. This mandates that individuals must be treated as autonomous agents. They must enter research voluntarily, armed with complete, transparent information. This principle birthed our modern standard for informed consent, and that affects each and every one of us here today. Autonomy for those men was deliberately ignored. Beneficence, the strict obligation to protect participants from harm, ensuring we maximize possible benefits while minimizing potential risk. This was violated completely by actively denying a known life-saving cure for dying and suffering men. The do no harm oath or pledge was completely denied. Justice. The requirement that the burdens and the benefits of research must be distributed fairly. It explicitly states that researchers cannot exploit the poor, the marginalized, or vulnerable population simply because they are convenient to manipulate. The men of Macon County bore all of these burdens, suffered the agony, and received absolutely no benefits. The Belmont Report provides moral clarity, and gave us an ethical spine. It legally institutionalized institutional review boards, IRBs, to protect human subjects. But while the policies changed, the pain did not instantly evaporate. Today, every institutional review board must approve medical trials. Every informed consent form must be signed by the patient. And every ethical guardrail in modern research exists because the Belmont Report was created to answer inhumane cruelty. This is why the work of Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation is profoundly necessary. This foundation, founded in 2014 and led by actual descendants of the men harmed in the study, refuses to let these men be remembered merely as clinical data points, footnotes on a page, or anonymous victims. We are humanizing their legacies, ensuring that the world remembers these 625 men as they truly were, our beloved ones, our precious fathers, our adoring grandfathers, our loving and protective brothers, our uncles, hard-working citizens who loved their families and built their communities. A couple of days after my father found out that he was in this study, he had received a phone call from a representative from the CDC. Prior to that, he had received a phone call from my brother in Texas and asking him if he knew anything about a study that had gone on in Tuskegee for all these years. And my father said, "No, I don't know anything about a study like that." And my brother went on to read him more of the article and describe how the nurse would come and take blood, and they would go out to the hospital every once in a while for a test or whatever. And he said, "Yeah, I remember doing some of that." And then a couple of days later, someone from the CDC, as I said, called and said that he was in the study. I guess you can imagine how he felt, my father, learning this. And there are many other stories how the men learned of it. And understand also, we didn't know anything about the study. Nothing. But my daddy said, being as wise as he was, and a Christian man, very calm, he said, with a very strong voice, "I can't do anything about what has happened to me and all of those other men. But it's up to you all to make sure it doesn't happen again." Those words are embedded in my mind, but I would hope that they would also be embedded in your mind. And each of us have a role to play in never allowing that to happen again. It is my prayer and reverent hope each of us will use our voices, our minds, our hearts to make sure the three principles of the Belmont Report remain the unwavering compass guiding the future of medical ethics and human dignity. Never again should we allow or endure a study like the United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis happens to anyone, anywhere. Thank you, and God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Head, for the powerful remarks and for sharing that legacy with us today. I'll ask our panel to go ahead and join me up here. In the meantime, I'll introduce myself. My name is Natalie Klein. I'm the acting director at HHS's Office for Human Research Participants. It's a privilege to be here with you today, and thank you so much to Kim Prime for envisioning this event and inviting us to be part of this panel. There are note cards going around. If you think you're going to have a question that you want our 5 panelists to address, please grab a note card, and Lieutenant Will Boyd is in the aisle right here waving note cards and pens around. You can jot a note or a question on the card and pass them down the aisle for Lieutenant Boyd or Captain David Wong or Zena Alhija, or Lieutenant Commander Devin Thomas in the aisles. They're waving at you now. So please take some time to do that if you'd like to ask a question later on in the panel. I'm going to go take my seat and then introduce my office a little bit more. Okay, does everyone hear? Okay, these are push to talk for the panelists here. So the Office for Human Research Protections is the regulatory authority for the regulations that were established to protect the rights and the well-being of the individuals who participate in HHS-supported or conducted research. It's a privilege to be in a role like this. I know many people in the audience today have dedicated their careers to advancing ethical research and to looking out for the best interests of the participants of that research. I am joined by several experts. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, starting with you, Dr. Laura Broche.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this invitation. It is so meaningful. I'm Laura Broche. I'm the interim vice president for research at the Uniformed Services University, and if you haven't heard of it, it's the Department of Defense/War. Their service academy that trains physicians, graduate nurses, dentists, and allied health science personnel. I served in the Army for 26 years as an Army nurse scientist, and ended my career on active duty assigned to Fort Detrick, Maryland. There are many people here from the Department of Defense. Can you raise your hands just to show how, thank you, that we are an active part of this community and really appreciate this opportunity. My work has primarily been in trauma research ethics and conducting research with military personnel, often thought to be a type of vulnerable population. So I'm thrilled to be here today and discuss how these foundational principles have really permeated everything we do. Thank you.
Professor John Mark Hirschong.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
No.
Turn this off. There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay, but I can use my outside voice of it.
Here you go.
Can you hear me now? There we go. Yeah, great. Thank you. So first of all, thank you to the organizers for this very important event today. I feel very honored to be up here representing kind of the nuts and bolts. I'm the IRB chair at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. I've been with the IRB for 25 years. I started medical school 40 years ago, so I've been in medicine either as a student, a trainee, or teacher, or professor for many years. And it's very important that we're here today to discuss this because we are doomed to repeat the past if we don't learn from it. And so it's very important that we, as a group, have come together, and I really, again, thank the organizers for this wonderful event. By way of background, I'm trained in both emergency medicine, so my clinical practice is taking care of patients when they come in, often on the worst day of their life. I'm also trained in preventive medicine, looking at public health and looking at how do I prevent the worst day of their life. And then finally, I have a PhD in epidemiology because I want to study and do research. But to do research well, I want to make sure I do it ethically. I want to make sure other people do that research ethically as well. So I bring a number of different perspectives, but I'm a practicing clinician. I still work clinically. I'm still the IRB chair. And these are, I think, very important things to discuss as we look at how best to implement the guiding principles from the Belmont Report.
Dr. Ivy Tillman.
Good morning. Can you hear me? No? Okay. Can you hear me now? All righty. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I am Dr. Ivy Tillman, and I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization called PRIMER, or Public Responsibility in Medicine and Research. And we exist to advance the highest ethical standards in research. And we do that through supporting and educating the individuals that Ms. Head mentioned, the IRBs, the IRB professionals, research ethics professionals, and oversight professionals. My background in research began over 25 years ago in pediatric sickle cell research. And working with our patients and our families really inspired me to learn more about the framework and the principles that undergirded what I was doing every day. So I was responsible for informed consent and having those conversations with patients and their families and understanding, honestly, where we could do a better job. I then went into the IRB office and began training IRB professionals and IRB reviewers, and I then oversaw IRB offices. And so my background, I have a doctorate in, does it work now? No. Okay. In education, but my passion is community engagement and in ensuring that American citizens in our community understand the protections that are available and that are there for them in research.
Thank you. Dr. Molly Clote.
Hi, good morning. Nope, not me either. Good morning. I'm Dr. Molly Clote. I'm a physician by training, a retired Army colonel, and the former director of the Office for Human Research Protections. I've spent most of my career working at that intersection between medical research, federal policy, and where, real people come together when those two meet. I've chaired institutional review boards. I've reviewed research programs across really large health systems and worked to help researchers, institutions, and communities to understand what these principles mean and to then put them into the policies at their institutions. What brings me to this conversation today, and I'm so grateful to have been included, is the deep respect for the enduring Belmont Report. But also the belief that we can't treat it like a museum piece. As Dr. Bhattacharya said, research has changed, and the application of the Belmont Report has to change with that. So I hope we can honor Belmont today by asking those hard questions about what those principles really mean today. Thank you.
Can this one someone be live? Oh, thank you. Mr. Ted Nicholas, I think we're having a couple, we have like two working microphones up here.
Okay, it's working.
Great, thanks.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. My name is Ted Nicholas, and I'm a beneficiary of the works, the good works that the Belmont Report has been carrying out these past years. I was born with sickle cell disease. It's a little difficult to kind of make you understand exactly how my life was. If you ever seen a baby in pain, if you ever seen a person in pain, it's disheartening and difficult thing to watch. My parents were at their wits' end. They had no idea what was going on with me. I wasn't born in the United States. I was born in the West Indies, the island of Haiti. And it took years, 6, maybe 8 years before they can figure out, before they were able to get a doctor from the States to explain to them what was going on with me. And in hearing that news, that was also disheartening, because what they heard was my death was imminent. At 5, they actually thought I would die one night. By the time they found out what I've had milestones, 10, 15. Each one of those, they were expecting something to go wrong. Schooling was difficult, so they schooled me how they could at home, and sometimes couldn't go to school because I was rolling around in the fetal position in pain, and they just did not know how to help me. And as I got older, sickle cell kind of gave me a little bit of a break. When I say a break, from weekly crises to maybe one a month, maybe every 2 months. However, it still posed a threat to my life. At any moment, a stroke. For those that don't understand, I should have actually really gone into the details of how you get sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease is a genetic mutation. It's inherited through 2 parents with the trait. So I, the firstborn, sometimes it hits 1 out of 4. Sometimes it doesn't strike in any of the children. But this disease is mainly stricken. It strickens only the minority population. 90% of black men, women, and about 5%, I believe, in the world of Hispanic, and other percentages throughout the world. Many people who do not look like me have been diagnosed with sickle cell because it's a blimp on the radar. But however, fast forward, when I came to the States, after college, after continuing to survive sickle cell, I ran into a doctor. The doctor was called, his name was Dr. Silverberg, out here in Howard County. After college, I moved out here and ran into Dr. Silverberg. Dr. Silverberg told me about some great works that were being done at a government agency called NIH. I knew nothing of the place. And he was telling me that there are human trials being done. That put a flag in my head because I've read about human trials, and being a black man, it spoke to me, and I thought I sat there silently myself and just ignored it. But he handed me some documents and told me, check it out. I think that is the first time I ever seen something on the Belmont Report. I actually put that to the side. I said that has nothing to do with me, and I looked at the actual research, and the research at the time was about hydroxyurea. This was about 20 years ago in the 90s, late 90s. I was desperate at that time. I was newly married to this lovely young lady here to my right. And part of me said, no, you can't let this disease beat you. Read this document a little bit more in depth. And so I took a look at it, and at the time, I believe they were doing something with hydroxyurea at the NIH. Hydroxyurea has been around for some time at the time. At that time, it was a cancer drug which helps rebuild red blood cells, and it was found to minimize the amount of crises that a sickle cell patient would go through. It helped bolster my red blood cells. And I said, well, it looks harmless. Talked to my wife about it. She's a nurse, and she gave the okay. And that was my first experience with human trials. So fast forward.
Ted,
Yes.
Ted, and I had a chance to talk to your graceful wife before the program, and she shared that you several years later joined a second clinical trial, and you were in a little bit of a different place in your life. Can you mention that second trial?
Yes, 20 years later, 2000, at the peak of COVID, I volunteered once more. This time it was more dangerous. I joined the trials for the cure for sickle cell disease, stem cell research. I was only given 57% chance, but I read through the documents really quick, and 57 was better than 2 years left off on my life. So I took the chance once more, and I stand before you now, cured.
Incredible. So thank you, Ted. We'll come back to your story later in the discussion. Ivy, I want to turn to you a moment. We heard some powerful history about the Belmont Report and its responsiveness to the untreated syphilis study. Can you shine any more light on the historical context and the Commission's work, the National Commission's work?
Hello? Okay. Sure. The Belmont Report, if you think about the context in which it was developed and written, this was a pivotal time. And we've heard about the timeline to Belmont, so I won't go into great detail. But there were scientific advances and awareness of the research abuses, but also a need to protect the individuals involved. And this led to the development not only of the principles, but the oversight system that we have today. And so I'll talk a little bit about that for a minute. We were aware of the nation was aware of the Nuremberg war crime trials, and the Nuremberg Code was drafted. But a lot of the guidance during that time was focused on physicians and investigators, and there was less around oversight of research and the protections of research participants. And we have a timeline at our table if you'd like to take a look. But there were abuses that were happening here in the United States. For instance, the Willowbrook experiments, which involved mentally disabled children who were deliberately infected with mild forms of hepatitis, as well as the Jewish chronic disease hospital case around indigent patients who were chronically ill and who were injected with live cancer cells. And there was an article in 1966, for those who've not read it, from Beecher, around 22 published U.S. studies that showed that there were serious ethical flaws happening here in the United States. And Ms. Head brought us to really understand or reminded us that the U.S. Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male is the catalyst and the reason that we have the Belmont Report today. And so the question is, how can we advance research or scientific progress while protecting the people who participate? The National Commission came from that 1974 National Research Act, and they were charged with two very important subjects. They were to address the boundaries between research and practice, the history tells us that, and to also develop those principles that you've heard about. The commission was unique, and if you've not had a chance, I encourage you to look at the commission's videos. They're on the OHRP website. Read the transcripts to understand the context and hear from some of the commissioners and the staff themselves. But this was a congressional mandate, so Congress responded. And I think that's really important for us to know that Congress responded, and as they said, this commission had teeth. They had to do something, and it had to be put into regulations. The commission was unique in that, listening to some of the commissioners, it was really clear that they were seeing this as an act of public service, and they spent years making sure that we had these principles and the regulations. One of the commissioners, Dr. Dorothy Hyatt, talked about how the voice of the public was essential and important, and that they ensured that the voice of the public and the perspective of the public was included.
So, Ivy, you've mentioned to me the ecosystem supporting ethical research. We have this amazing report, the Belmont Report, Foundational Principles. Who is using that report, and who's part of upholding the responsibility to support research in an ethical manner?
So it's interesting because immediately we go to IRBs, but I want to back up because when the Belmont Report was published, it was published in the Federal Register intentionally to make sure that everyone involved in the research enterprise was made aware of it and that they followed it. This was the signal that protecting research participants is a shared ethical commitment across the entire research enterprise. So you may ask, what are you talking about, the research enterprise? Those are the federal agencies, the academic institutions, corporations, with researchers, study staff, sponsors, community partners, and IRBs that ensure that those principles are applied. And when we think about IRBs, I do some community engagement where I go and I talk to communities about not specific research studies, but about what it means to participate in research. And I always ask the question, have you heard of an IRB? And oftentimes people still aren't aware that IRBs exist and what IRBs do. So I'll give you a quick lesson for those who are not aware. An IRB is a committee, federally mandated, a committee that reviews human research before it starts and while it's going on. They exist to protect the rights, welfare, and safety of participants. They do that by applying the Belmont principles. So they ensure that risks are reasonable, they make sure that consent is meaningful, and that selection of participants is fair. Membership on an IRB is balanced, and so oftentimes people ask, well, who's sitting on these committees? An IRB must have one person who's scientific, their background is scientific, but what I really loved and what resonated with me when I began in my career was that IRB also had one person, has to have one person who's non-scientific. And so that could be a lay person, it could be an ethicist, it could be a member of clergy or a community member. And they also have to have one member who's not affiliated with the institution that where the IRB is held. So oversight from an IRB does not end once it's approved. It continues throughout the lifetime of the study.
So John Mark, you chair an IRB, and IRBs, the scope of what they review is research. So, and one of the charges to the National Commission from Congress was to distinguish research from non-research. Can you briefly comment on that distinction?
Sure. Well, the thing I wanted to add to Dr. Tillman's comments is that the IRB is a committee often made up of volunteers. And so we're always looking for members, committee members, interested members who would like to participate on the IRB and help with the research review process. And now I'm happy to be up at University of Maryland, so this is actually a bit of an advertisement. If you're interested, you can reach out to me, but to any of us, because the IRB is strong by its membership. And so your participation can help strengthen those IRBs. But to go to the question being asked, what is the difference between clinical practice and clinical research? So clinical practice is, the therapy is meant solely to help one specific patient. If you were to come into my emergency department, which I hope never happens, if you were to come in, I'm going to take care of you as a patient. I'm going to do what the literature says is the best current modalities, whatever disease process, trauma, whatever it is. My job is to take care of you as an individual. If I'm doing research, I'm trying to test an idea. I want to create generalizable knowledge, so perhaps publish it. In short, practice is really focused on the individual, while research builds on the medical science. Now, why is that important? Because as a researcher, my primary objective is to answer a scientific question. That doesn't necessarily mean, so I have to find that balance between being the clinician, where I'm trying to take care of the patient in front of me, and the research trying to answer a scientific question. And how that's balanced out is that we take the knowledge that we have, we create scientific protocols, research protocols with the best knowledge, and then we test it. So this is the best care we have based on the research. Is this modality, is hydroxyurea better, or is it not? Okay. Now we know. So if someone comes in, hydroxyurea is used. But in 20, 30 years ago, we didn't know. And that's how the research helps to advance it. But we want to make sure we do this in the right ethical framework, so that way these experiments, if you will, are done in a very organized, systematic, thoughtful way to answer specific questions, which ideally will help the patient in front of us. But as a clinician, my job is to take care of you and do the best I can with what we know. As a researcher, I'm going to try the best that we have from a science perspective. It may or may not help. We don't know, and that's why we're trying to ask the question. If we know, it's no longer research. We then implement it.
So Laura, we heard a little bit about those foundational principles in the Belmont Report, the first of which is respect for persons. Can you talk a little bit about the wording, respect for persons? What do you see as significant about that framing of the principle?
Well, the default often for respect for persons is that an adult has the ability to make the decision about what happens to them. And it's very focused on the individual. It's, we expect that the individual is given enough information to make an informed decision about whether or not they want to participate in a study. The flip side of that is when that person isn't able to make that decision, and that's an area I work in a lot, where these are trauma patients, and they are unable to make a decision, but we need to learn about what injury they've sustained and how to take care of them. And so there's additional protections to add to those, to seek permission from someone if possible, or the FDA has granted us the ability in very limited circumstances to waive that requirement for permission. I think informed consent, we could talk for hours about the state of informed consent in this country. Less is more. I think the Belmonters saw that, and at least Tom Beecham in his interview noted that they kept making him write it and rewrite it to take out the philosophy, to take out the jargon, make it plain speak. And if we could do that in our consent processes, make it not a 20-page document that protects the institution from liability, but explains to the patient and their family about what exactly is happening to them in this study, and gives them enough information, doesn't overwhelm them, and lets them make a choice.
Thank you. So, Molly, we've heard a little bit about Ted's story as a patient with a serious condition deciding to participate in research. Some people participate in research as healthy individuals, maybe for reasons of altruism. I know you have some experience with this. I'm interested in your thoughts on how you approach respect for persons and how your own experience as a healthy volunteer has informed your approach.
Yeah, so when I was in medical school, I got approached, actually my whole class got approached to participate in a malaria vaccine trial. And there was no real upside to participating other than we were going to be helping to advance science, right? We were healthy volunteers in the Uniformed Services University Medical School. I think I ended up in the study off a triple dog dare from my lab partner who said, you would be stupid to join that. But the investigators assured us that if we got malaria, if the vaccine didn't work and we got malaria, we would get sick over spring break and we wouldn't miss any school. Well, as a lot of things happen in research, the timeline slipped and slipped, and I actually ended up missing a month of medical school after getting malaria. But it absolutely shaped the way I've approached throughout my policy career and how I've conducted informed consent of researchers or of participants in research that I've conducted, making sure that people know that timelines can slip, that I can't guarantee anything might or might not happen in this study, and I will control as best I can what I can control and tell you if something is going to change.
Ted, Molly just talked about no guarantees in research. As somebody in your most recent clinical trial, what helped you to be able to make an informed and voluntary decision? What can research teams do better to make sure that people who are considering research participation are able to make a fully informed and voluntary choice?
As you mentioned before, plain English. Someone who understands the language and can explain it to you in layman's terms, and as simple as they possibly can. Not everyone has a medical degree or can read at a certain level to understand the language. So I would say plain language is a great help, and someone who is aware, who understands the language and explains it in plain.
Thank you. Other panelists, any comments on the informed consent process or other aspects of respect for persons?
Okay, back again. I would say what I've found is that oftentimes, particularly when you are involved in developing the consent document and actually conducting the process, it's not just about signing the document. It is about the conversation. And so when I would train investigators and their staff, consent is a process, and it doesn't happen just at that one point. It happens throughout the study. And I always tell individuals considering to participate or who are, you have the right to ask questions again. You have the right to change your mind. You have the right to take the document home and discuss it with your family. Belmont, the framing of respect for persons was more on an individual basis. And I think that, as we discuss expansions of Belmont, one area that we need to expand in is understanding the importance of the community, and that we live in community and that people live in families. I had a grandmother who was on dialysis, and I'll never forget, she was at the dialysis clinic and was given about a 25-page consent document to read and said, go ahead and sign up for the study. Well, she brought it home, and they didn't know who her granddaughter was. And so I was able to, in a way, I was able to educate her and reassure her about what was going to happen and that she had the right to participate or not. And that's what true, meaningful, informed consent is.
Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just add that as Dr. Bhattacharya talked about, the research environment is changing, right? We have these large data ecosystems that we're in now. We've got these genomic testing that, because I enter a study and I learn something about my genetics, as Ted learned about his, it potentially affects other people in my family, right? It potentially affects other people's, right to know about that information that I've just learned about me that my children may be entitled to know. And so the effects of the changes in science are really changing how we should be looking at this consent process. And as Ivy talked about, it is the community. You're looking at the family community, a tribal community, the military community. I mean, whatever community it is. And I think that's an area that we've got to be mindful of.
Well, go ahead, John Mark.
And again, a bit of a amplification or a different perspective is we have these large data sets now. We're looking at health systems research. And if, for example, I'm going to help guide whether to give 1 gram or 2 gram of a medication. Medication's approved. We know it's going to work. we're just not sure the dosage is better one or the other. I have to get the physician's going to give it, but physicians don't generally ask patients about the medications. So where's that consent process? Is it the physician? Is it the patient? Is it the health system? So where we were 50 years ago with the idea, and critically important idea, of making sure the individual involved is giving their informed consent to the best of their ability, we're now at a place where we're looking at not just genomics, but health systems and things like that, and trying to understand what is the consent process there and how do we make sure that it's, there's justice, it's, minimize any risks while maximizing benefits and making sure there's adequate respect for individuals, but it's at a systems level, so it's very complicated.
And I have a feeling we'll return to that in the Q&A. So I'm going to segue to beneficence, because some of what you were talking about raises questions about respect for persons isn't the only principle. There's also a need to maximize the benefits and apply the principle of beneficence. Molly, I'm going to go back to you and talk about healthy human research a little bit and beneficence. What does Belmont say about beneficence? And in your mind, how can research teams seek to better maximize benefit while minimizing harm?
Yeah, so Ms. Head gave a beautiful description of beneficence. And what Belmont said wasn't just research should help people, right? It was much more demanding than that in the document, and it gave researchers an obligation to avoid harm where they could, reduce risks as much as possible, and be honest about whether the possible benefits justify asking people to participate, right? And that puts that responsibility on the investigator. It also then has, we have the Institutional Review Board as that backstop to look and say, have they really done this? Because for the investigator, it may be their very first study they've ever done. They may not understand the longer or the bigger implications of whatever it is they're doing, or the community harm that might arise from what they're doing. And that's where an Institutional Review Board really comes in, and because they see so much research going on, they have that broader understanding of what potentially could happen. And so, being involved in research and looking at what's being done, I tend to look and say, do you really need to collect all these data, especially in this new data ecosystem world? Do you really need to collect all those data, right? We know from studies of the FDA that 94% of the data that gets collected in some study is never even looked at by the FDA when they make a decision about approving a drug. But yet all those data exist, and they exist because people are afraid not to collect it. And so I think one of the challenges is to ask, do we really need to collect all that data and have all that data available, for however long in all these systems that we don't actually know right now how that's gonna play itself out.
So you mentioned the role of institutional review boards in reviewing beneficence. Who else should be involved in those conversations about beneficence?
Yeah, so
open to anybody.
Yeah, hopefully, it's my hope always that the patient who is being recruited into a study, or the healthy individual, will ask the questions, but we can't put it on them to do this. So it's really other people, as Ivy talked about, within either their community, with the other people, community members, clergy, people that are part of that ecosystem of research should all be looking. The people running the clinical trial on the back end should be looking and saying, is this, are we doing what we said we were going to be doing, right? I mean, the whole public health service study turned on one person whistleblowing on what was going on. And so making sure that we're actually following what that plan is, what we told people we would do is critically important.
Laura, it looks like you had something to add to this.
Well, I think folks probably don't realize that when a new drug is, or I know all you professionals do, but When a new drug is tested, the first phases of that test is to see what dose is effective without hurting you too much. So that it's very possible in a phase 1 drug study that you may have adverse events, and that may be the stopping rule for that dose. That may be the signal that that we can't go any higher. So we need to work within those limits. And so IRBs and the FDA require things called data safety monitoring boards or panels or plans that will look very carefully, monitor very carefully for where those signals start to, and that's the harm part of this. The beneficence part is, yes, we're there to cure X. The harm part is we may have to hurt you a little bit to find out how we can treat X. And having that plan in place, I think, is critical here.
Now, Ted, we've heard a little bit about these committees and data safety monitoring boards. Sometimes I wonder whether it's overlooked the smaller discomforts or inconveniences about research participations that can actually be quite big for the person in the study. Are you able to share any of the examples of what helped support you or what could be done to better support participants to minimize those kinds of day-to-day challenges, logistics hurdles, or other discomforts in the study?
Well, I would say as a participant, surround yourself with an army of love because it's as you're discomforted, the people around you will be discomforted. They'll say things like, maybe it's the drug they're giving you, or maybe it's the treatment that they got you doing. That's why it's important to speak to your research team, let them know what's going on with you, let them know how you feel, when you felt it. You know, if you can journal, journal. I've always found that to be something that that helps the program, researchers, and your family. My family always knew when there was something going on because I would use words like good. I'm okay, even though I'm suffering, but as the patient, it's hard to tell the researcher something is not working, it's not working, because you hope it works, and you tend to fudge a few things because you want it to work, but be honest. Tell them what's going on.
Thank you. I'm going to, Ivy, ask you a question that segues a little bit between beneficence and the principle of justice, which is, I'll refer to a common critique with the Belmont Report, that it may focus on protection from exploitation, sometimes to the exclusion of talking about why it's important to be represented in research and to have opportunities to participate in research. Can you discuss this question a little bit, your thoughts on this issue?
Sure. So within the principle of justice, justice talks about fair distribution of the benefits and the burdens of research. And when the Belmont Report was written, we understand the historical context. It was about ensuring that those who were deemed vulnerable were protected. So oftentimes what we see now is that it may feel like there are over-protections associated with individuals and populations. But it's really important to understand that with injustice, it says also in the Belmont Report, an injustice occurs when a benefit someone is entitled to is denied without good reason, or a burden is imposed unduly. And so, to me, that means that you have to also include. You can protect. IRBs make sure that they are protecting through the regulations, and the regulations are there as that framework and that guide. But you have to consider inclusion, and how can we include more individuals in research? And historically, this is something that we've been focusing on a lot. Not just protecting people from research, but recognize the harm of being left out of research. And there is great harm when individuals and populations are left out. We don't know whether treatments work for them or not. And we need to make sure that research is accessible to all while you're also being protected.
John Mark, are you able to share any examples of how IRBs try to strike that balance?
I was thinking just then about the importance of recognizing that the Belmont Report was a point in time and a specific activity or report, and that this is an ongoing conversation, and trying to find that right balance remains critical. You know, I was on a data safety monitoring board looking at a medication for sickle cell disease, and we went back and forth during many meetings, do we stop the study or we do not stop the study? And finally, we stopped the study for what's called futility, because we didn't think it was going to work based on the data we were getting. And when we unblinded it, we were really surprised to find that the area that we thought was the better part was actually the placebo or the non-active arm. And so, but again, we stopped it because it wasn't going to work. We had enough data there to stop it for futility. So finding that right balance is an ongoing process. And I think the whole issue of research ethics is very dynamic because the environment continues to change.
Ted, in the conversation about research opportunities and participation being represented in research, how did you learn about the opportunity to participate in your most recent trial, and what would you advise people who are interested in seeing whether there's a study out there that might be something they want to join?
For me, it was just being involved in the information age. I tried to learn as much as I could about my disease. On the web, books. If it was about sickle cell disease, I wanted to know what was going on. Talking to my doctors, just speaking, joining groups within whatever ails you. The information is out there. You just have to go look for it. Unfortunately, it will not come to you. You must inform yourself by doing the research.
Thank you. So anyone else who has questions, put them on a card and flag down someone in uniform. I'm going to start transitioning to some of the Q&A because I think they really get at what we've all been talking about offline, which is where are we at now with Belmont? I'll open this to all of the panel. It's three basic principles. It sounds straightforward, but in practice, is it straightforward in practice? Are there cases where the principles actually conflict with each other? Can anybody speak to an example where the principles might come into conflict? Laura, go ahead.
Sure. I think that when you look at what the population that stands to benefit versus the convenient population to do the study in and get it done. So you're going to be efficient. You want to not prove this treatment. We're fixating on medical treatment, but medical treatment works or not works. But it's going to cost more money. It's going to be more expensive to include Spanish speakers. But really, they are a huge part of the, I'll say, Baltimore community that really suffers this burden of this disease. Trying to, work efficiency of getting it done and getting an answer with being inclusive of who should be have, I don't want to say the privilege of being in the study, but the benefit of being of learning the knowledge from this study. Sometimes it's attention. And, then you come to your administrators and see, can I get more money to really nail the population that should be in this study? Go
ahead, John Mark.
So you had mentioned earlier about what we call EFIC, or exception from informed consent studies. And there's one where you really have to the respects for the individual versus the beneficence. In this instance, someone comes in, let's say they've just been shot, they're bleeding to death, they cannot give consent, but the time is so precious, you don't have time to go find a next of kin or someone to do it. So there's a structure now in place, which was not part of the original common rule and things like that, to allow us to do exception from informed consent. But they're very, very strict criteria because we can't get the individual's consent or their surrogate. And so we have to get community participation before we do any research. But again, there's a challenge there between making sure that we do the research in a way that's supporting the individual in front of us, while recognizing that we cannot, simply by the nature of the disease, able to get the consent of the individual.
Thank you. There's been so many questions coming forward about data science and the advancements of AI. It's certainly an exciting time for science, but it's a time that raises a lot of questions as well for individuals. How do you see the Belmont principles applying to this type of innovation? Do they work? A few people have asked whether there are additional principles to data science or data privacy that Belmont just doesn't cover.
So I'll start. I think one area, like if we could, if there was an area we could add on to Belmont, it would be around who is a subject, because the definition of subject has changed with data science, and particularly in considering who is a subject, what does meaningful informed consent look like now in this era versus how it did when it was more on the individual basis. So those are kind of the things that I've been grappling with and thinking about.
Others on emerging technologies or data science or AI?
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
Natalie, right now we can look and say, yes, we've got this data set that's diverse, right? But that same data set could also be exploitative for a particular community, right? The model, as it gets put together, a model, in AI, as you model and train an AI to do something, it may work very well on average, right? But then you take that same model and it might fail for a particular part of the population. And those are things we really have to look for.
Laura, go ahead.
Come on. Another thought, so I work with data scientists all the time, and and it's very complicated. Let's say you're developing a decision support module to work in an ICU for a certain subpopulation of patients to give you an early warning system for X. Convert that into a consent form. It's hard for the physicians and the providers in the ICU to understand the study to begin with. It's a little black box, right? Then you want to, if it's a study where you can't waive consent and you need to get individual consent to follow the population longitudinally, let's say, turning that into English that is understandable is really difficult. You almost need Google Translate to translate itself to be able to put it in layman's speak to understand why it's a good idea or maybe not a good idea for you to participate in this study.
So some questions have actually been comments to acknowledge that the ethics violations we talked about today are not the only ones in history. So I do want to acknowledge that. We've talked about a couple of examples today. That's not the only cases known. And there may be unknown cases, of course. There's also comments supporting people who work in this field, and thank you to people working in this field. On the topic of innovation, though, there are some questions about how have we and how can we continue to innovate human research protections itself. Does anybody want to speak to that?
Oh, this is my favorite topic. I want to get on my soapbox here a little. But it's really, at this point, it's time to start studying how we do this, right? We have how many years of doing informed consent sort of the same way? And what do we know today about what really works and what doesn't work? We haven't studied it. A lot of us are scientists in our background, and we don't treat these protections the same way that we look at other scientific areas. And I think it's time to start studying what really is working and how we can advance the field through evidence-based policymaking, evidence-based ethical decision-making.
I'm going to push back a little bit because I figured it's good to have a little bit of a dialogue here. The ability to do the research is very challenging, because one of the problems is that you can look at how efficient you are I can get this protocol through in this quick, I can do this, I can do that. But the question you're asking is how effective are they? And I don't think we have yet great metrics for that, in the type of stuff. And I think that's where, when you look at innovation, because I agree with what you're saying, it's not an easy task.
It's not easy. And the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, has challenged us 3 times, has challenged the federal government 3 times over the last, 30 years, Natalie, to come up with these efficacy measures, right? And so it's time, I think, that we've got to put some money behind it. I think that's really what's held back looking at this, that each time the GAO has challenged us, there's not been the money put behind the effort to really come up with these metrics.
Ivy, go ahead.
Thank you.
I want to frame innovation in a different way and consider, oftentimes when we're talking about the Belmont principles and the work that we do, we want the public to trust. And we've asked the public to bear a burden of trust. And so, to me, innovation looks like us flipping that frame and asking how trustworthy are our practices and our systems. So if we think about it, this is a reflexive practice that oftentimes we don't get the time or chance to do, but it's needed. What are the behaviors and the conditions and the commitments that we have embedded in our systems? Are they lending to trustworthy practices so that the public can trust the research and science?
Ivy, that's related to a few of the questions about what the average person who may not work in this field of human research protections, what can the average person do to support trustworthiness in the research enterprise?
May I?
Go ahead, Ted, please. Yes.
From your question, if you have cancer or whatever your ailment, it's important that you share because that instills trust, and not just in the medical field, but within the community of which you exist. As many people as I meet quite a few people. I come across sickle cell patients across the board. I tell them, I share. I tell them what medicines I used, treatments I tried, everything I can possibly tell them about the medical field, because I tell them because they don't know. They are often isolated, being sick. They don't have time. They only know their treatment. They don't know what's out there. So it's important that you, as the patient, you share with others.
Thank you, Ted. Laura, did you have something to add?
With increasing frequency, the more successful networks are involving the patient population in setting their research agendas, in actually designing the studies to not be overwhelming and overly burdensome. And I think, NIH, through their PCORI, Patient-Centered Outcomes Network, certainly the cancer community, there's a huge advocacy community in many disease states where patients are setting the agenda, not just the medical establishment.
We're coming close to time, and I want everyone on the panel to have a chance to say any last thoughts on whether it's how we're doing now compared to how we were doing when the Belmont Report was written, or what you think the American public should know, or what you're most excited or hopeful or even concerned about in the months and years to come. Laura, I'll start with you and go down the line.
Well, thanks for that wild card opportunity. And so, and this is really for the professionals in the room, the IRB can be looked at as a police state. It can be looked at as adversarial, like we're out to get you. Like the assumption is you're going to do something wrong and we're going to protect the population from these researchers. Really, our job is to work with the researchers to do the research, to help them design the best study, to be a mentor, to be a coach. And so as you kind of the arc of maturity in a professional's course. I think in the beginning, I'm all about the regulations. It's non-compliance. It's versus here's how you can get there, and we can do this together. And I think the most successful HRPPs take the principles of Belmont and show investigators how to do it.
How to get to yes. John Mark, what are your closing thoughts for the group?
So I would, a couple of thoughts. First of all, I wholeheartedly agree with what Laura was saying. It's the key component in high quality research is the investigator. So you have to make sure the investigator is educated and supported, and they're able to do the best quality work. But in the end, it's all about people. If you're looking at the research we do, it's about individuals on a study. It's about the individuals who are conducting the study. It's about the individuals who are reviewing the study. So what's critical is to make sure that you've got good, transparent communication. You're clear about what you're trying to do and why. And really to build the trust, because what happens is there's a legacy of broken trust. And what our job is through the Belmont Report is to acknowledge that legacy and to rebuild it through our actions and our mutual respect and trying to do what's best and what's good for the people that we're working with.
Thank you. Ivy, go ahead.
I think for me, what excites me is the type of conversation that we're having today. And I would not have known that we would be here when I started about 26 years ago, having conversations with the professionals, the scientists, and the public. We need to have more of these types of conversations. Building community within research practice, including the public voice, is also very important. The profession has evolved. We have accreditations now. We have certifications now. And I'm most excited about the future generation. I'm at a point in my life and career where I'm looking back going, who can we educate? Who can we excite to continue this work? As science progresses and evolves, research ethics also has to do the same.
Yeah, so I agree with what everyone has said, and because we often talk about rebuilding this public trust, but it's not something that the public owes us in research, right? It's something that we have to earn. And I'll go back to the idea that it's really the way we're going to earn it is by being able to show that the way we do this actually works. And the way we're going to do that is by collecting that evidence. And so I think that is really the next step in our journey.
Thanks, Molly. Ted, your final thoughts.
Well, everyone here talked about trust. It's important, very important that you instill trust within the community. And the Belmont Report does that significantly. Not many people hears about the Belmont Report, but getting the word out there is important. Patience, like I said, I saw the Belmont Report, I put it aside, but when I finally did read it, I got it. And instilling that, letting people know that if they're participating, that they have backup, that these are their options, and the options have to be clear.
Thank you, Ted. And I'll share that over the past 3 months, the Belmont Report has been the most downloaded document on the hhs.gov website, nearly 50 years after it was written. And so that gives me great assurance of how important this continues to be, how influential. It's been a privilege to sit alongside experts today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. To our audience, some of you dedicating your careers to these important issues, I want to thank you. Research Protections is a shared mission. And to Kim Prime, who is the architect of this really lovely event, thank you for including us in the program today. And I believe, as I thank you and tell you to have a safe journey home, I'll let Kim share any final administrative announcements as we close today.
Well, thank you, everyone. Let's have another round of applause for all of our panelists and our speakers. As we conclude today's program, I want to extend my sincere thanks to everyone for coming and all who made this event possible. I'm especially grateful to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and in particular, the Office of Human Research Protections, for their partnership in bringing this important conversation to Belmont Manor and Historic Park. A special thank you goes to my dear friend now, David Wong, who's collaborating. Yes, absolutely, David. Your collaboration, expertise, and dedication were instrumental in planning this event and helping us commemorate the enduring legacy of the Belmont Report. Thank you as well to our distinguished moderator, Natalie, and all of our panelists.
Going off on you? I'm so sorry. I had a timer to stay on track.
We're all just having a little housekeeping right now. But thank you, Natalie. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your knowledge, your perspectives, and to everyone who joined us today to reflect on the past, engage in thoughtful discussion, and consider the future of research ethics. Before you leave, I invite you to take some time and enjoy Belmont Manor and Historic Park. Please feel free to meander through the grounds, explore the first floor of this historic county-owned manor if you haven't already, or please do feel free to go inside. Right now we're experiencing a little colonial air conditioning, but inside we do have modern day air conditioning inside. And enjoy the complimentary refreshments courtesy of HOCO 250. We also have some complimentary giveaways too, so do help yourself. But thank you again for being a part of this special program and for helping us commemorate this important milestone as part of Howard County's HOCO 250 celebration. We wish you a safe journey home and hope you'll join us again for future HOCO 250 events. And of course, we welcome you back anytime at Belmont. Thank you very much.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.